roll. So Veronica Figueroa. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Please unmute yourself. Members, please unmute yourselves. Does it work? Or do I have to unmute?
I did the click.
They should be able to now.
They can click?
Oops. Okay, now they should.
Okay, members, please unmute yourselves. I'm going to call the roll. All right. Yeah, great. Veronica Figueroa.
Here.
Tom Brown.
Here.
Keith Finley, not here. Greg Glembeck.
Here.
Kim Jorgensen.
Here.
Charles Miadzi.
Here.
Luke Sheevy.
Here.
Jackie Hunt is not here. Matthew Brongin.
Here.
Great. We have quorum. Next up, disclosures and recusals. Does anyone have any disclosures and recusals for any of the items on this agenda? Seeing
If so,
none.
use the raise your hand feature.
Oh yes, use the raise the hand feature from now on. Now let's move on to item number 3, election of chair. So if someone wants to make a motion, in fact, you might have more experience with this than I do. So somebody might, oh, Greg is raising his hand.
I'd because the ad hoc had very good experience with Tom and Keith as co-chairs, my inclination is to nominate them, but Keith is not here, so I'm not certain how to handle that. But I would definitely nominate Tom. I would also like to nominate Keith, but if somebody thinks that's inappropriate because he's absent,
Okay, does anyone else have a comment? Oh, go ahead, Kim.
I would say that's totally appropriate, and I totally agree.
Anyone else have thoughts? Luke.
I would second it, and I would assume that if, for whatever reason, he does have an issue with being co-chair, we could discuss it again next time. But perhaps we could.
Keith has arrived.
Oh, well, there we are.
Just in time.
Keith, we have a question for you. Would you like to be co-chair? He's muted.
Thank you. There, I couldn't unmute myself. I needed you to unmute. Thank you. Sure, I'm happy to do that. With whom?
With Tom is the nomination. Greg nominated you and Tom.
Okay. Tom, are you in?
Oh.
Yes, I am. Okay, good. Look forward to working with you again. You as well.
Any other nominations? Let's take a vote on this one then. Luke has his hand up. No. Oh, okay. If all the members could unmute themselves, does that work? All right. Is it working? Tech, our tech support, are they able to unmute themselves, or now I have to unmute them all? Oh.
There we go. Now we can unmute.
Okay. If all the members could unmute themselves to vote for this nomination. Do I need a second for this? Somebody who's in.
I seconded it.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'm just making notes here. Second. Thank you. All in favor? Okay, I'm going to do it the way they do it, which is if anyone has an objection to this being recorded as a unanimous vote in favor of electing Tom Brown and Keith Finley as co-chairs of the committee, please raise your hand. Veronica. Okay, so roll call. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Never mind.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm fine. I was trying to close my box and my mouse was in the wrong place. So no, I have no questions.
That's okay. Absolutely. So then I'll record that as a unanimous vote. And now I will step back here and Tom and Keith can decide who is going to call on people, unclick people, etc., move us through the agenda. Since having too many people clicking at the same time, like I said, turns out poorly, I've found.
Yep. So Keith and Tom, you are both co-hosts now, so you have the power to mute and unmute people.
Okay. I'm looking for the agenda now that I have here somewhere.
Do we have any public comments?
That is the next item. Item number 4. Let me refresh once again to make sure. One moment.
No, we don't.
We do not.
Okay, is it safe to say that we can move on to item number 5?
Yes.
Okay, and I understand that Dr. G was going to make some comments on number 5. Karen, is that correct, Karen?
I believe so. And so he will, if he wants, he can raise his hand and then you can unmute him.
Okay.
And he can make his motion.
So Tom and I can unmute him, is that right?
Yes, but if you both unmute him at the same time, I don't know what will happen.
I have not done anything. Where does it say to unmute someone?
If you open the participants,
Yeah.
click on participants. Now you see everybody there.
Yeah, okay. There, I've tried to, there,
Yep.
I've unmuted him. There we go.
You've got it there, Keith?
I've got it taken care of. Yeah, he's unmuted.
Okay. And Luke also had his hand up, I believe.
Okay, we'll get to Luke then after you.
But I think he had his hand up before me.
Oh, okay.
I was just going to ask, and I don't know if this is out of turn, but just if we could potentially enable it so that we could all unmute ourselves and see if that would work. And if it becomes a problem, then perhaps we can go back to the old strategy. But I think that it's just causing more delays right now.
Is that okay, tech support?
Totally up to the chairs.
All right, I'll leave it up to the chairs.
I would like that. Just what I would ask is that if you're not speaking, just mute yourself so that we don't get a lot of background noise. And then if you want to speak, raise your hand, and Tom or I will call on you, and then you can unmute yourself. Does that sound okay?
Works for us.
So tech support, are you unmuting? Are you making that change, or do we do that?
I just did it, so everyone can unmute themselves and mute themselves.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so was that it from you, Luke? Okay, Greg, you had something?
Yes, I'd like to make 2 motions.
Okay.
The first motion would be to allow the chairs to make motions and vote.
Okay, do we have a second on that motion?
I will second that motion. Do I need to raise my hand? I'll raise my hand from now on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Kim, you have your hand up.
Yeah, that's fine. We can use Luke's second. I was going to second, but we can use his.
Okay.
Well, before we motions and seconds and whatever, what's the reasoning behind that?
It's more inclusive.
We now have a motion and a second, so now it's time for discussion. So that gets to your question, Veronica. Greg, did you want to answer?
Yes. like I feel it's more inclusive, and it worked. That's what we did on the ad hoc committee, and I felt it worked well.
Okay.
Any other discussion or questions? Hearing none, then following Karen's protocol, how about we say, does anyone object? If there are no objection, we'll record it as adopted by unanimous consent. So are there any objections to the motion?
To object, you would raise your hand on the hand function.
I am not seeing any hands up. No objections. If I've missed it, somebody unmute yourself and speak, but I don't see any objections. That being the case, we'll consider that motion adopted by unanimous consent. Greg, you had a second motion?
Yes, I have a second motion. I would like to move to suspend the rules to allow, like I expect there will be a lot more public engagement with this as the process moves forward. And I would like us to be able to function as the ad hoc committee did, and as the Alder work group has voted to do now, and also as the president's work group did, so that any members of the public who are attending who wish to participate in the discussion can do so. So that would be my motion.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Kim? Is that a second?
Yeah, that's a second because I agree. It just makes the conversation more fluid and easier to track.
Okay, any discussion? Charles?
Are we still using a time limit on public engagement, or are we just letting people speak freely without a time constraint?
Greg, when you say suspend the rules, does that include suspending the time limit?
Correct. Now there's like the way we did it with the ad hoc, and I think the way it's being done with the Alder work group and the way it worked with the president's work group, you have the public comment period. For that, there's a 3-minute time limit. But once the discussion actually begins, then people can speak without a time limit. We didn't really encounter any significant problems with that, I think. But if somebody were to go on endlessly, then somebody could remind them of the time, perhaps make a motion, but it worked well in my experience, at least.
Luke?
I ran into a few situations with Public Safety Review Committee, how it actually took up more time. But if you think it worked well within the realms of what you did before, I guess we can go ahead and do that. But
I suppose if it becomes problematic, we can always revisit it.
Okay.
Sorry, real quick tech support. To lower people's hands, co-chairs, just hover over their name, and then you'll see the lower hand option. So that way that'll get rid of some of those hands after people have finished speaking.
Okay.
Also, I'm noticing some of the members of the body are not muting themselves when they're not speaking. So please remember to do that. Thank you.
I want to call attention. Attorney Haas has his hand up. I want to see if he has a way to phrasing or anything we need to.
I was just going to comment. I know that there's been experience with this before, but we did have some recent discussion about just how to handle the registration requirement for members of the public, and specifically, under the rules, their ordinances, members of the public are supposed to register before the body starts its own discussion. And so if you're going to suspend the rules, maybe we should just also be clear on if the discussion has already started, are you going to let members of the public register? They still need to indicate and register that they want to participate. Do you want them to register by the time of the meeting, before the item comes up for discussion, or during the discussion?
Greg?
I would say, go ahead, Keith.
I was just saying.
I would say register beforehand so that we'll be prepared for who's going to speak prior to as we start.
But I'm assuming, Greg, your intention is that if someone does not register beforehand, that we will not bar them from speaking. But as Mike is suggesting, that instead we ask them to fill out registration papers then, so that we have a record of that.
That is correct. The intent is that only registrants would be able to speak, but that if somebody were late, then they could register and then be allowed to speak.
Does that work for you, Mike?
Sure.
And let's see, I think, I'm not sure who was, I see Veronica's hand is up.
I don't have a problem with the rules being suspended. I'm just wondering how those rules are going to apply now that we are online and that it's not actually like before we had an interaction with the public that allows for us to be back and forth with a particular person if that person wanted to make extra or comments on the conversation. Without putting a time limit, I'm afraid that this is going to take forever. And the environment right now around police and these issues are also not very good, right? As we know. So I still feel that we should have some sort of boundaries in terms of timing. But then how do we bring somebody back? Do they have to re-register to come back and talk? I mean, how would that work? I don't know if Mr. Hens can answer that. Like how, because before we were all in a room and you were sitting there. Now we're all in a computer in a box. How do we manage that? But I still think that we need to have boundaries on time. We don't want somebody just going in there and ranting over and over and over and over again, and then not allowing the rest of the public to speak or to, I don't have a problem doing the lifting of the rules. I just have an issue of how is that going to be coordinated in this environment that we're in right now.
Well, I think part of that is a technical or IT question as far as how people register. I think, basically the people need to register for whatever agenda item they want to speak on. And I know there's a process for doing that with the Zoom meetings that has been used. That seems to be working. And so I don't know, Karen or Joe, if you have anything else to add on that process.
Yeah, there is that process, but why? How do I come back to comment again once I already?
Yeah, and I think that's a matter of you still have the chair, the co-chair facilitating the meeting. In my mind, the people still need to be called on. They can't just interject, and it is a little bit harder when you're not in the same room and able to kind of read somebody's body language about when they want to talk, but. In my mind, at least, the chairs still need to facilitate the conversation and recognize people. It's up to the chair to recognize people to speak.
Joe, am I right that unless you leave, you won't be? It doesn't. In my experience, it doesn't remove you from the meeting once you're finished with your comments automatically. You can stay once you're in.
Absolutely, for sure. Yeah, you can. You'd be muted if you're an attendee or a public registrant. But as long as they're still in the meeting, there's nothing preventing anyone on the body from calling them back to ask their opinion.
I see 3 more hands up. Is there a way to know? I didn't notice the sequence. Is there a way to know what the order is on those?
They're in the order in which the hands were raised. So whoever's on the top was the first one to raise their hand.
Oh, very good. Thank you. That would be you, Luke.
Yep. I would just voice my support of suspending the rules with the assumption that it is not going to be a problem, and that if it does become a problem, that we would be able to reinstate the rules, even if it was a minority of the group that wanted the rules reinstated. I don't know if there's language around that we can craft into the motion, but I just wouldn't want, too many people to, like we said, be able to speak for too long and have it become rambly. If a couple of us aren't comfortable with it, I'd like to be able to have the option to undo that later.
Well, if that's the intent, and I don't know if that's would be a friendly amendment that Greg would accept or not, but one way that you could do that, I think, would be that the motion would be we suspend the rules until such point as any member of the committee objects, or any 2 or 3 or whatever number you want to put objects, at which point the rules are reinstated. I don't see any reason why you couldn't write it that way.
Sure.
But that depends on whether, at this point, whether Greg will accept that as a friendly amendment, and if not, then you could make a motion to amend his motion.
Sure. That will be my suggestion. 3, I would say. If 3 people are not comfortable with it any longer, reinstate the rules as a friendly amendment.
Greg, do you accept that as a friendly amendment? Can't hear you.
He's on mute. He's on mute.
Oh, was that 3 people?
Yeah.
That Luke mentioned? Yeah, that would be friendly.
Okay. So that,
Let me make sure
3 people.
Yes, Karen?
Let me just make sure I have the language. So suspend the rules, and then how do you want to phrase the suspend the rules to allow?
Suspend the rules to allow community members to participate in discussion, and the rules shall remain suspended unless and until such point at which 3 committee members object to continued suspension. 3 or more. That make sense?
Yeah, just got to get it down.
Okay. Luke, are you done? Okay, I'll lower your hand then. Kim?
I'm in favor of keeping the time limit and case by case, giving people the exception to continue. I think that would be easier for the chairs to manage than somebody who wants to go on forever and they can say the rules are suspended and so they have the right and they end up arguing with you. Just thinking that that's an easier process than trying to pull it back and then the time it takes to go back and undo the suspension to add time frame. That's just my rambling thoughts.
Okay, so that is, are you proposing that as an amendment to Greg's motion, either again as just an amendment or as a friendly amendment, depending on his position on it?
Yeah, I guess to clarify, keeping the time limit for now as a friendly amendment.
Greg, do you accept that, or do we want to take this up as a separate amendment to your motion?
I think take it up as a separate amendment. Like, what I would say is, like with the ad hoc, it was handled pretty well informally. I thought, like, if somebody was, talking too long, like if I was talking too long, like Keith might say, hurry it up. And that worked pretty well. Like, I didn't really see much of a problem with how it worked.
So Kim has made a motion to amend Greg's motion. Do we have a second to Kim's motion?
I second Kim's motion.
So Veronica, you second that? All right. So
I just, for the sake of time and for moving us along, I just feel that if we keep this completely open, we're just going to get stuck with people that are very frustrated. They have the right to be very frustrated. So the time needs to be established. And yeah, we can continue to allow you to come back and talk and whatever, but we need to have that timing boundary. We do. I mean, and it's just be fair to everybody else that wants to comment on whatever we're doing. And courtesy to those who want to speak to whatever we're going to be doing in this committee. So I think that the time needs to be there. Yes, suspend the rules, but yes, also we need to have boundaries on. You can come back and speak. Now let's give the floor to somebody else, and then you can come back later if you know what I mean. But I just don't feel comfortable with not putting a time limit to people's. And we can all, you guys as chairs could say, okay, yeah, we can extend your time if the person requests more time. You can decide that, or we can decide that as a committee. So, because I mean, we did it at the beginning of the ad hoc committee with the review. So I don't see why we couldn't do that now. And I think it's important that we hear the community, but we also have to get our process going and not get stuck on ranting. And I'm just very concerned that we're going to get stuck on some people just ranting and not really contributing much, but ranting.
Greg, is your hand still up, or did I just fail to put it down? No, okay.
Yeah, put it down. Yeah.
Kim.
Yeah, my hand's still up or up again. I agree with Veronica. I think it also helps the speaker be focused and structured and really have to be thoughtful about presenting what they want to say. And I think that's probably in our best interest.
Okay, thanks. Matthew?
Yeah, I actually think there's a lot of strange way, a little bit more flexibility here. With the fact that like Greg was saying, the co-chairs could, again, just suggest to hurry it up, as well as have the capability to mute folks that are just, going too long and not abiding by the rules. I think we can still have a pretty open process as long as the chairs are fine with keeping tight lid on things. If folks are, being difficult. So I don't see any reason why to put heavy restrictions on anything. And I think we could just copy what we did with the ad hoc.
So can I just make a comment? I think we're actually not very far off from each other's positions. I think the goal is the same. It's just a matter of sort of which way we want the presumption to go. So here's how I would envision under either scenario. And I'm not advocating for one or the other because I'm okay with either. But if we go with Greg's version, then I think Tom and I as chairs would exercise discretion to try to rein people in who were taking up too much time, wasting time. Yeah. If we go with Kim's version, Tom and I as chairs would exercise discretion with the permission of the full committee to let people exceed their time limit. In the end, the result is probably going to be about the same. It's just whether you want to have to seek permission to go beyond or whether you want to seek permission to cut someone off. And that's really the only difference. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's sort of what it looks like to me.
I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I have, when you get there, to the language of the amendment, not the friendly amendment, but Kim and Veronica's amendment. If I can get the language of that before you vote.
Kim, can you restate that?
Maybe. Language that says we keep the time limit with people being able to ask for an extension case by case.
Do you mean the 3 minutes? So
yes. Yeah.
So suspend the rules. So your amendment would add to the language that
suspending the rules except for the time limit.
Up to community members can participate for up to 3 minutes at a time.
Right, and then with the ability to ask for an extension if needed, case by case.
And then I think the way it goes, right, Keith, that it's you vote on the amendment,
right,
and then see where it goes from there, right?
Exactly, right. Any further discussion on Kim's amendment? If not, then I guess our ordinary procedure that we've established here is we'd ask for unanimous consent, but I think we already know we have competing positions. So why don't we go ahead and say all of those in favor of Kim's amendment, raise your hand.
And give me a minute to be able to write everybody down. So in favor.
Could you restate Kim's amendment once more? I apologize.
Kim's amendment is simply that added on to Greg's motion is to suspend the rules. Kim's amendment is suspend the rules with the exception of retaining the 3-minute time limit for public comments, with the understanding that the committee will have the discretion to allow people to exceed that on a case-by-case basis. Right, Kim?
Yes.
Okay, I see 3 votes in favor of that motion. All those, so I'm going to lower those hands now. And so all those opposed, please raise your hands now. I take it a number of people are not taking a position because we have 1 opposed. And the rest, does that mean everybody else is abstaining? Yeah.
Mr. Chair, just the public that's viewing can't see the raised hand feature. So
shall we?
I don't know if staff wants to lift off names of who's voting. Yes or no.
I can read them off. So those in favor of Kim's motion were Kim, Veronica, and Charles. Did I get that right? And those opposed were Greg. And everyone else is taking no position. If I've got that wrong for anybody, let me know. If that's the case, it looks like Kim's motion passes. And that brings us then to the base motion, which is to suspend the rules with the exception for the 3-minute time limit as previously stated. Any further discussion on that? Hearing none, can I accept that as unanimous consent of the committee? If you are opposed, raise your hand. I see no opposition, so let's record that as adopted by unanimous consent. Any other matters to take up for rules or special agenda? I see nothing there. Do you, Tom?
Nope.
Okay, so then let's move on to then item number 6, which is setting a meeting schedule. Anybody have any ideas about how often you want to meet?
Well, Karen sent out a list to all of us, Keith, on some of dates. So I would like for people to have the opportunity to review those dates and double check them with their personal calendars, and just so that we can make sure we could get on the same page. But in terms of days and times, I would suggest that we would meet at least every 2 weeks at worst. That would be my initial suggestion.
How does that sound to people to start out at least by meeting every 2 weeks? I see heads nodding. Anybody have any objection or different opinion on that?
Luke has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Luke, yes.
I actually would motion to move this agenda item until after we develop the work plan, because I think depending on the deliverables that we have for that work plan and the nature of how we structure that, we may want to meet more often or less frequently depending on what we put in.
Okay. Does this kind of motion require a second? Mike, can you help me with that?
You're muted.
Sorry, I think the chair can move around agenda items unless there's any objection without a motion.
Okay. All right. Is there any objection then to moving this to later in the agenda? All
Kim
right.
has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kim.
Yeah, that's okay. A similar thing, I was just like, it would be helpful to know more if we have any specific deadlines and what we have to accomplish by those deadlines.
Okay. All right, good. So let's move this to later in the agenda. And instead, let's take up the number 7 is the process for recording and requesting IT support.
Let me just explain that one if you... Yeah. So that's just on there to let you know, and some of you heard this as you came in earlier, just to let you know a little bit about how this is working with type 1, type 2 meetings, with IT support, and with the council staffing. So council office staffing. So and IT can chime in. The way we got type 1 support for us tonight, we weren't sure whether there was going to be a high volume of registrants or not. Once we have a schedule, we can submit if we choose. If you would like to try to get more support, we can. Once we have a schedule, we can submit the schedule, and they can choose. They will let us know if they can cover anything on a case-by-case basis. They can make a decision if it fits or not. Because I know that there are several other evening meetings that are already type 1, and the benefits of doing type 2, which is we record it, we put it up on the afterwards, we put it up on the website, folks can go to it and watch it, is that we can schedule for ourselves. So the only thing that matters in that case is this being used by someone else, this account? Is it being used because I've got another committee going at the same time, in which case we can't schedule. So that schedule I gave you was all these times when nothing is scheduled with this account yet. And then am I around, am I scheduled, am I doing another committee or am I available? That's it. And so type 2 allows us a lot more flexibility, but we don't get IT support, which I'm getting the hang of things. And some of you are also getting the hang of things really quickly. So I'm thinking it won't be a problem unless we do end up with a meeting with 200 registrants. I do find it hard to predict. That's kind of the overview.
You said this was type 1 support. Can you tell us what
right now this is type 1 support. You've noticed we have 2 tech facilitators. We have streaming. Yes. Oh, voice.
Yeah, if I may, I could answer questions about type 1 versus type 2. Sarah was going to be here. She couldn't make it tonight, so I'm sort of here in her place. If it's all right,
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so type 1 meetings are facilitated by the IT department. We would typically have a host and a co-host who are the technical facilitators you see here. It also means that the meeting would be streamed live on MediaSite, which is the city's streaming system, as well as YouTube. And if a slot is available, it would play live on the cable channel as well. We can only support so many type 1 meetings. And so typically something like this that's a subunit would be a type 2 by default. We did the first one as a type 1 because of the nature of the business that you're conducting. So we wanted to get an idea if we were going to get a lot of public participation, what kind of viewership we were going to see. And right now, we haven't had any registrants, and I'm looking at our streaming analytics, and we have 2 viewers in MediaSite and 2 viewers on YouTube. One of each of those is probably our staff account viewing. So based on that, I would assume that unless something changes, these meetings would lend themselves to the self-facilitated type 2 designation, which gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of scheduling. However, the one thing that you wouldn't get from that is live streaming. So people who wanted to see the meeting would have to be registered as participants and would have to be participating in it. You would still have streaming afterwards. So it would still be recorded. It could still be recorded and then be available for on-demand streaming on both the MediaSite and YouTube platforms after the fact.
Anyone else have any other questions? Greg, you have your hand up.
It wasn't a question.
Okay. Does anyone have questions? So Karen, is this something we need to do something about right now, take action on, or is this just informational?
I was thinking it's mostly informational, but I think if someone has a strong feeling, I think is probably now the time to express that. Capacity is really tight, and I'm glad Boyce is here because he's media team. He can speak to capacity, and given that these are evening meetings, I just wanted to make you aware and to see if anyone wanted to maybe have a discussion or raise any concerns or anything.
Well, I would like to hear from some of the other committee members exactly what your feelings are on this topic. Just if you would interject some of your thoughts, please. Veronica, no, was that Greg?
I'm sorry, Greg was first.
Yeah.
I'm fine with either type 1 or type 2. I think there will be more registrants going forward. Like this is just the organizational meeting. The one thing that I did want to bring up, I know for the Alder work group, IT was working on a mechanism to allow people to indicate they wish to be called on. So, we would need something similar, like whatever they worked out for the elder work group would have to be applied here.
I mean, I think that
Are you guys hearing Greg? Because I'm not.
I did. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Must have been my end.
I think that as long as it gets recorded either way, right? It's going to be available to people either way. As we progress in this topic and, get really our hands dirty in the work, then maybe we can think about having some sort of type 1 set up again, where there's more of a, I don't know, openness to what we're doing. And as much as, and just again, we have to do some outreach too, to let people know that this is happening. And I'm sure the community response team will do their job into like letting people know that this is, this minutes are happening. I have no doubt about that. So I think once we kind of like people know that we're doing what we're doing, then we can decide whether we go with the 1 or the 2 tier decision here. But I think for right now, I think the type 2, it's as long as people can have access to what happened here. And the process will continue to be transparent as long as we have access to it. So,
Charles, looks like you're next.
I think it was pretty much covered before you guys called on me. So,
okay.
So my next question would be for Karen. Karen, do we have a deadline, an actual deadline that we have to let you know which one we want to go with, or will this be a week-to-week scenario? How will that work?
That is a great question. Boyce, what would you like? Because I know you need advance notice of any request.
Yeah, well, just to let you know how we do scheduling, every for any given week, we do crew scheduling the Tuesday prior to that week. So, ideally, we'd want to accommodate that. So in most cases, that's a week to 2 weeks, depending upon what day of the week the meeting falls on. So we'd want it prior to the Tuesday prior to the week of the meeting. And again, we have a lot of bodies that are competing for this, and we have sort of a prioritization scheme that starts with standing committees, and first and foremost are the 6 that were identified by the Common Council president and the mayor to start out with, and then we have the ones that were added later. So there's really not a guarantee that a type 1 slot's always going to be available. But the more notice we can get, the better the chances. And we may be working around, if Common Council Executive Committee, for example, requests a slot at the last minute, they're getting it. So this is as much lead time as we can get, and the latest would be the Tuesday prior.
And then
Thank you.
Before I forget, also, I want to, at some point in this discussion, have someone from tech support describe the new registration function that Greg was talking about. Greg, I don't know if it's quite what you imagined, but I want to have them explain it so that because it's the same for everybody, like all the type 2s now. So I just want to put a pin in that in case. And whenever you want to come back to that, but I just wanted to let you know that they can explain that to you as well.
Okay. Anything further on this issue before we move on? Greg, you have your hand up?
Yes, what Karen just mentioned, that probably should be on the agenda for the next meeting, so they can explain to us, the mechanism.
You want it on the agenda for the next meeting, so then we'll have somebody from IT invited to come.
We can explain it now if you have questions.
Oh,
it's already up and running.
That'll be better. That'll be great.
As of yesterday, I think. Well, the registration is the same as type 1 in type 2. I think you're asking about people being able to view it live. Is that the question?
No, the mechanism, I know for the elder work group, there's a mechanism that was being set up so that when people wanted to signal that they wish to speak, like attendees, not committee members, then they'd be able to do so. So that's my question.
That has not.
The question is, what's the process for community members to join the meeting, speak, be seen, whatever it is? How do we bring them into the discussion technologically?
So Joe or Paul or Joe, let me help you here. If at this point now that you have the new thing, if you register but you don't wish to speak, do you still get a link to be able to join the meeting for type 2? The new way.
No, you do not. If you say you do not wish to speak, if you register and say you are available to answer questions, you receive a link to join the meeting. And if you register that you want to speak, obviously you receive a link to join the meeting. I believe what Paul was referring to, something that I believe came active yesterday, is now when you go to the meeting schedule on the clerk's website, there's another option, which is just watch meeting online. So you're not actually joining the meeting to participate. You just want to watch it live online instead of on demand later. And Paul, I think if you could correct me on that one.
You're correct.
That's okay. Yeah. So
that was added yesterday.
If you get that link, can you talk if someone calls on you?
Well, so I guess we don't,
because you're not officially registered, right?
Yeah, right. So you need, legally, and Attorney Haas would be the person to ask on that. But yes, to speak at a meeting, legally you need to be registered. So it does make it a little tricky if people are in the meeting viewing it that haven't registered yet.
So there isn't yet. Do you have this on your? My understanding was there was going to be a way for folks to register, not without having to say they're available to answer questions, but then they can participate once the rules are suspended. That was my understanding, but I could be wrong.
That would be a question for Attorney Haas if that's legal to do.
I think he said it was okay.
Without being registered.
Well,
at the meeting.
Some kind of way of registering, but Greg has his hand up. He could probably explain it better.
You're Greg?
You're muted, Greg.
To put it crisply, the question is, for registrants, is there some mechanism to do the equivalent of, for registrants who are not committee members, not participants, is there a mechanism to do the equivalent of raising a hand so they can be called up?
Well, I guess that's up to the chair. In the type 2, you guys are all here in the meeting, and there's a way to allow them to raise their hand.
So Paul, here's
in the settings.
Here's the scenario. We have, as a committee, decided we want to allow people who are just observing the meeting. We want them to sort of on the fly be able to register and then participate in the meeting by raising their hand. So the committee's already made that decision. The question is, does the technology permit that?
Yeah, because they.
I would say yes, but
because they can raise. We can it's a meeting instead of a webinar, which I don't want to get too far in the weeds here. But for a type 2 meeting, anyone that has joined the meeting has the ability to raise their hand, and then the chair call on them whether or not they're legally registered to speak. And I guess if you suspend the rules, I don't know, that's again a question for someone with law degree.
And the committee said they wanted, for example, if they saw somebody there who was in with us, because they don't have a panelist attendee split in type 2 meetings. This is, I think, what they're trying to say. It's just participants. So everyone can raise their hand. So that should be good. Just the sticking point about registration, Keith, the committee discussed asking. So let's say you see somebody on the list of participants who's not on our registrant list. you would then ask them to go ahead and click through to register. And then we refresh it. It would be there. And then they could come in and participate. Was that what we were thinking?
I don't know. I can tell you that with our previous ad hoc committee, we didn't always require everybody to register. If somebody was there and we had a question for them, because we'd suspended the rules, we just asked them to talk. Now, what I'm hearing Mike Haas say is that they should be registered. And if that's the case, then what you're suggesting, Karen, I guess is what we need to do. But I think as far as we're concerned, as far as I'm concerned, I don't want to speak for the rest of you. I don't know the effect of being registered. It doesn't really change my work at all. So I don't really care personally. I don't know how the rest of you feel, but that depends on what the city thinks is necessary.
If I could just interject. I mean, I'm looking at the ordinance. It says that members of the public who comply with applicable rules, including registering to speak, on registration forms established by the city, shall be permitted at least 3 minutes to speak. So, I think if the committee wanted to suspend that rule, that there had to be registration, it could. When we were discussing this last week, it was my view that it's best just for transparency and record keeping for the city to know who is participating in the meeting. So, if whether or not that is actually filling out a form or going through this online process of registering, or if you just consider somebody raises their hand and the chair asks them to identify themselves and the minutes reflect who's speaking, that was my concern, is the transparency and having a record of who participated in the meeting. I wouldn't get so hung up on, for me at least, legally speaking, whether or not somebody has filled out the form, whether that's important to you. That could be accomplished again by suspending that part of the rule that requires them. Now nobody is actually filling out a form anyway. We consider this online process to be equivalent to filling out a registration form. So I think if the committee is not concerned about the person technically registering, it can still accommodate people. But in my view, it's better to continue to keep a record of who is participating in public meetings.
That makes good sense to me. So unless somebody objects, I propose that the way we will proceed is that people can still register, which means we will give them the opportunity that's set forth in the agenda to speak before we begin our discussions. But then the rules are suspended. Anybody who's joined the meeting can raise their hand and be called on and speak. And if they haven't otherwise registered already, we'll just ask them to state their name and ask, Karen, will you be taking the minutes?
Yes.
Ask you to record that in the minutes so that it's there. And to me, that facilitates conversation and makes community participation easier rather than making people go through some formal step of clicking on some registration form. So I don't know that we need to vote on that, but I propose that that's the way we do it, unless others have different thoughts about that. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
Okay. That makes sense to me. And from what I recall from the ad hoc, like when somebody spoke in discussion, Rachel would ask them to fill out one of those forms.
Okay. Charles?
Well, the only thing for me was just trying to make sure that everything was done fair and equitable for everybody involved. I mean, I don't know if there's a time limit for the public to be engagement as far as speaking. Just trying to keep everything as a steady flow and making sure that everything is fair and equitable to everybody. So I don't know if I'm to touch up on exactly what Kim was trying to say and to make sure that everything is done in an orderly fashion in a time restraint. And I guess having everybody fill something out is a I don't know. I guess that's a good thing as far as having everything thought process, everybody signing up and having their thought process, and rather than somebody just coming in at the last minute and prolonging what we're trying to accomplish in the night's work, or so I guess whatever anybody wants to vote on, but I just want to keep everything fair and equitable to everybody that's being involved, so we can move everything according.
So are you moving to require that all speakers formally fill out a form, or however we're doing it now, an online form?
Is that what's in the ordinances already? Would you move that if it's already in there?
Well, except that we've suspended the rule. So I was saying that I was interpreting the rule that as being part of what was suspended.
Okay, thank you.
My only thought process is that no matter what is suspended or not, I just want to make sure that we still keep everything. From what I've seen is that meetings can get out of hand with everybody just popping in and out. So yeah. I just wanted to make sure that we have a steady flow to keep everything that we want to get accomplished within a orderly fashion in a time frame that we try to get this.
Well, I can tell you that Kim's motion is aimed at that in part, and part of that will be Tom's responsibility and my responsibility to make sure things keep moving. The other question I have, though, is people can raise their hand and speak, but only if they have a link to join the meeting, right?
Correct.
How do they get the link?
This is a good question, and actually it goes right to what I was thinking, and I wanted to raise this. So as far tech support, help me out now. As far as I understand, with the new system, you get a link if you register to speak, register to be available to answer questions, or click on that new button to observe for type 2. You'll be able to get a link, but you don't get a link still if you register without wanting to speak or answer questions. If you just register, do not wish to speak, you don't get a link. Is that correct? Unless you go back in and ask for the observer link.
I'd have to ask Web Team if they've made a change in that or not. I'm not sure.
Here's
on that last part.
Perhaps resolve this, and that is there some way that we can just, whatever the answer to that question is, that we make sure that the minutes that we publish before make it very clear to the public what they need to do to get a link to the meeting?
The agenda. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, not the minute, the agenda. Yes.
Yep.
In the agenda, we very clearly spell out, if you wish to listen in live on the meeting and have the opportunity to speak at some point, although you're not committed to speaking by signing this, you must click this choice so that you will get a link to join the meeting. Otherwise, you will not be able to speak. Okay, so if we do that, and we have a 3-minute time limit, and Tom and I try to keep it all equitable and fair and streamlined moving ahead, are we all good with that process then, or do we need to address it any further?
Okay.
Veronica.
No, I don't think you have to address any further, but from being at the other city meetings and registering, I think we should just follow the same protocol and stop reinventing the wheel, because they already have those things in process. And it tells you when you get the agenda exactly how to get a link and how to register. And either way, you're going to have to register. I don't think that there is a way out of the registration piece. Whether you want to speak, whether you want to give an opinion, whether you want to answer questions, you're still going to have to register. So I don't think we should be spending too much time in reinventing something that is already in place for the council meetings and for other meetings that are happening already before we started meeting here. So I think we should just follow that protocol and not go crazy about trying to or even decorate the wheel. It's out there already.
There is a new addition to this, though, as of this week, which is this button, this observer button. And as far as I understand, even though they put their name in, it doesn't show up on the registration list. So we would still then have to identify them somehow, I believe. Is that correct, Paul, Joe?
And I guess also, given that the technology is changing now, all that I'm saying is let's make sure that the agenda makes clear to people what the various buttons mean, and it makes clear to them which button they have to push if they want to be part of the live meeting. Okay? All right. Anything further on that? All right, well then let's go take up agenda item 8, develop a work plan and a timeline. Anybody have any preliminary thoughts? Well, maybe I could start out by throwing out a few thoughts, very preliminary thoughts that I had. And it just seems to me that maybe the first thing we want to do is sort of think about and identify the specific questions that we think we need to answer to produce our report. And it seems to me one of those questions, and they're interrelated, but one of those questions is, do we want to recommend that the Madison Police Department adopt a body-worn camera system? And if so, do we want a full-on one, or do we want to start with a pilot project? And then that question requires inquiry into a number of things, including community perspectives on it. And that's probably going to require hearing from community groups and whatnot. It also, it seems to me, requires looking at the scholarly research that's out there and really understanding what it tells us about the effectiveness and the effect of body-worn cameras in practice. So that's one big category. And a second big category that I see is, if we are to adopt or to recommend a body-worn cameras policy, what should it look like? What should the policies be? Because as the OIR group pointed out, that if you're going to do this, you need to do it with great thought, paying a lot of attention to a lot of the issues that arise, such as, when does the camera get turned on? When does it get turned off? Is it automatic? Does the officer have discretion? Are there scenarios under which you don't use it? Sexual assault investigations or whatever it may be. How long do you keep the recordings? How are they stored? Are they subject to public disclosure? If things, there's a whole range of these policy issues that we would need to examine and really look into carefully. And to get a start on that, I actually went online and found a bunch of policies. Maybe, Brian, you probably have already done this yourself, but I found a bunch of policies from other police departments to look at the kinds of issues that they try to address in their written policies and what they look like. And then it strikes me that there's at least a third major area that we need to look at, and that is the technology. What are the options out there in terms of technology, and what are the costs? What are the pros and cons of various methods? I think there are some, that, for example, where the recording turns on automatically when the officer gets out of the car, and there are others that they do manually. And there's different storage systems and recording. So what are the technology options? So I don't know, Brian, you probably have a lot of the stuff I'm talking about already. I don't know that, but.
Yeah, I mean, I'm somewhat new to the conversation specifically with the body-worn cameras, but we do have, I mean, certainly we've got other model policies that we can acquire pretty easily. We've talked to a couple different vendors, so I don't think that will be too heavy a lift. I think the options are of vendors that are doing this on a large scale basis are fairly limited, so it shouldn't be too difficult to get an idea of the cost and the kind of technical challenges associated with this.
Thanks. So those are sort of the three broad categories of issues that I envisioned right off the top of my head, each with a bunch of subsidiary questions. What do you folks think about that? Do you have other thoughts about, other ideas about what we want to look into? Greg, I see you've got your hand up first.
Keith, you articulated exactly what I was thinking. Like I had the same 3 categories in mind, and logically it makes sense to initiate with the first one, which includes like community group perspectives and the scholarly literature. I know I sent out a fair amount of stuff to the old ad hoc committee. And with model policies, like the ACLU has a model policy that I think is pretty good. So what you're suggesting makes perfect sense to me.
Okay, thanks. Matthew?
Yeah, I don't know. I think one thing before you even, I like those 3 categories, but also at the same time, I think before we even look to other meetings and start really diving into these things, and I think it'd be a good idea for us as a community to get on the same page, is kind of philosophically what we feel the goal or like that. Like what body cameras what is the point of body cameras really, and really kind of tackling with that of why that drive, what do we see that they're supposed to address or allegedly supposed to address in their use. I could see different folks having different mindsets of the point of body cameras. And that could really kind of throw us for a loop as we start kind of going down this hole. If we're not having some sort of common understanding of what the point of possibly adopting body cameras could be, whether it's right or wrong or proven, just wherever you land, whatever the evidence shows, or so on and so forth. But just again, what's that possible point that we're setting down to explore?
Yeah, I see that as an important question that's subsumed under the first one I raised, which is, do we want to do it? And an important first step there is to figure out, why would we want to do it? What's it supposed to accomplish?
Yeah. Just need to make sure that's
yeah.
there. Yeah, and having that common understanding.
Okay, Luke?
So I have 2 thoughts now. The first is just in response to that. I agree that we should ask the question, and it makes sense for us to discuss it. But I think that in terms of the original intent of recommending body cameras was spurned by the same reason that the ad hoc committee was created in the first place, which was the fatal shooting of Tony Robinson. So I think that at least my initial assumption coming in was that that was one of the core goals behind trying to implement body cameras. But then to my second point, I would agree wholeheartedly with you, Keith, that I think the first step is listing out the questions that we want to answer as a group, whether that's going to be related to these 3 categories that we've outlined here. But I think listing out what questions we need to answer is going to shape what next steps we create for this work plan.
Okay, Kim?
My question may be the same as Matt's, but just clarifying, I'm here operating on the assumption that we want it as long as we can work out the correct details. But maybe I need to back up and clarify, are there reasons that we don't want to recommend body cameras, period, and maybe start with my hearing that information?
I think that's right, especially given that we're starting from a position where the previous committee said no. Right? So the question is, do we want to, they said no for now, but maybe later. And so the question is, well, do we want to go in a different direction now? So I do think that's a fundamental question.
Yeah. So reviewing why there was a no and then going from there to.
Yeah. Yes. And so maybe that's one thing we should do, put on the agenda for our next meeting, is for those folks who were on the previous committee. I don't think you produced a written report, did you, Tom?
Yeah, we had a report. It wasn't. I'm trying to remember myself. We submitted some paperwork, but I don't know how detailed in terms of a variety of pages it was. Veronica, do you remember exactly what that was like?
There was no actual report after the camera's decision. What we had was actually somebody that went out in the community, Jackie. Borges, who actually did an initial study of what people thought about body cameras. And we use that and many other things that Greg said to explore this whole situation on body cameras and then decide whether or not it was a yes or a no. From my personal, this is a personal decision when I was in the committee and as a former co-chair of that committee, my biggest thing was that I didn't want to equip the police department with more equipment without a process, without knowing exactly what you're talking about. Who's going to turn it off? When is going to be turned off? How is this going to be used? Where is it going to be stored? Is it going to be public record? Thinking about the victims that I serve that are heavily immigrant women and men, how is that going to be affecting the population that I serve at Unidos? Was my biggest thing to say, no, we don't need cameras. Now, in the new light of what we're living right now, I just have the question of like, okay, so we're very heavily on defunding the police, right? Which to me is just the wrong word, because there's no way we can defund the entire police department. We still need police at some point, right? So the wording is not the right wording, in my opinion. But the body cameras plays another investing more money into the police department. So I would rather listen to the voices of our community again and making my decision based on those voices than saying from this committee, oh yes, we recommend it, so now we're gonna move into doing it, and then we'll listen to you later. So I think that it needs to be first our community, listening to those voices, and then go and move forward. Also, we have Fitchburg Police Department, who's been with police cameras for about a year and a half now. Maybe we have a thing or two to learn from Fitchburg and how that went, how that's working or not working. I can tell you from my perspective, it's not serving Fitchburg Police Department in a very good light. Because what we knew for years now, we for sure know. So, which is a good thing in the perspective of learning and growing from experiences. So how is that going to play out in Dane County and in Madison when we have a much larger police department and police force? And I'd rather listen first to our community members, the pros and cons, and kind of also do our homework again on what is the benefit of this in this new light of what we've seen across the country with no matter whether you have that camera or not, you still overusing your power over people, right? So, and very little accountability. What we're seeing right now for activity happened because we had somebody, a bystander that actually recorded that and pushed for it. So the community is pushing on. So do we really have to all this money in this equipment plus the training plus, I'm still having my doubts of whether or not the police camera is a thing that is going to enhance my citizen rights of being protected and served versus hinder my citizens' rights to be protected and served, right? So
can I suggest this? I think it's all really, really useful information. And I'm wondering if maybe for one of the first items on our agenda for the next meeting, we should have a report from you and Tom about the work of the previous committee and the data you developed and the conclusions you reached and why, so that we can all sort of catch up to speed on that. And if it's possible to dig up that report you were talking about, that should be circulated to our full committee. Does that sound like a good way to start this conversation? And is Tom, are you and Veronica willing to sort of make that presentation to our committee?
Oh, absolutely. No question about it. Yeah, we'll try to dig up what we can and then we'll present that. Absolutely.
That makes sense to everybody else?
I don't have much to dig. I have all of that stuff in a folder. So
it's real small. So yeah.
But Karen, can you put that on the agenda? Great, thanks. Charles, you've been trying to say something. You're muted.
So basically to piggyback on what I've been hearing and the research I've done, just looking, even Googling some of this stuff out, is it seems like it's about trust with the Madison Police Department. For some reason, we have lost the trust, and the trust has not been there. So what I've seen and what I've I would like to also have a strong point of this discussion too is probably what MPD as far as doing to instill the trust back, because we can have, like people said, all the cameras, spend all this money, but if there's no way to instill this trust. So I think trust is a big thing that we also need to focus on, rather than just body cams. And so I think that was another reason why, as I researched a little bit, is that the reason why it was dropped in the first place, because instead of spending all this money, there should have been a way to instill get that trust back with the community and MPD. So I think that should be another critical area to look at, as how to, how is it focus on getting the trust back rather than, so I'm not opposing the body cam or yes or no, but also to look at that critical point as far as getting that trust back with the community and MPD.
Okay, thanks. Greg, you're next.
So I agree with what Veronica said on the importance of hearing from community groups. And from what I recall, there was the report by Jackie Bojas that really found and highlighted the trust gap. There was also a report by Kristen Roman. It's actually quite dated now, but I remember that coming out. And just sort of in response to what Kim was saying earlier, it's funny because I started out a number of years ago as one of the strongest advocates of body cam implementation. I started the first petition to the council to implement body cams here. But I'm also a scientist. So I've really tracked the scholarly research very, very closely. And in the last few months, I haven't looked carefully, but I've read pretty much every study that's come out. And my own position has shifted from somebody who was a strong advocate of body cams to somebody who I would say I'm now rather a body cam skeptic about whether they'll accomplish what people would hope for. So yeah, but all of that can be addressed within the first three of the segments that Keith raised.
Hey, before we go to the next person, Keith, let me just make this statement really quick. And Charles, you kind of hit on it earlier, and Veronica was right, but three main points that came out from that first committee were three words. Trust is one of them. Accountability was the second one. And again, privacy was one of the biggest concerns that came out of the report that Jackie Borges has submitted to the council. So in thinking about that, I think as we proceed, we need to think about ways of getting that back. I understand that. I think that that's pretty clear. However, we need to maintain the idea and have the notion that trust, transparency, communication, all of that is built through interactions. So I think there's going to be or need to be, I think, a array of different interactions that's going to show us that we can have those things with the police department if the cameras were to come into play. So I just want everybody to just think about that, because these were used issues that came up before.
Tom, what was the third item you listed?
There was accountability, trust, and privacy.
Privacy. Mike Haas, you have your hand up.
As far as what the committee is going to work on, is part of the charge of this committee to look at cost factors, or is that beyond the scope of what you will be looking at?
I assume that that's part of the question. I don't know how we could make a recommendation without thinking about cost. I don't know what the rest of you think. especially when as Veronica mentions, that the discussion now is about, as she said, the wrong word, defunding the police. But, how much do we want? And if the science shows that it's a marginal benefit, I think we ought to think about whether the cost is worth it then. So my own view is that I think we should at least know about the cost. Anybody have a different reaction?
Yeah, Keith, on that initial committee we also had a gentleman that was, I don't remember his name. I don't know if Veronica remembers his name or not, but we had a gentleman that sat on the committee that was from IT. Veronica, do you remember his name? I know he retired not far into that committee proceedings, but he was representing the IT department and he shared some things.
Okay.
Yeah, he gave a detailed budget of how much all of this would cost, from storing it to deleting. Also, he did a whole full. I don't know if he sent that as a PowerPoint presentation, but he did come and speak to the cost.
Yeah, I think we'll want to look at that again. Veronica, you have your hand up though. Was that about something else?
Yeah, so I just want to remind all of us that there's more than this recommendation in our recommendations. There's 177 recommendations, and I don't want the body cameras to come in front of those, because a lot of our recommendations have to do with that trust building, and that needs to happen. Whether or not we approve body cameras, that needs to happen. So I think that keeping that in mind, that this is not all and everything, whatever happens in these conversations, we still have to hold those other recommendations close and make sure that they happen, right? Especially starting with the oversight board and all of those things. So I would hate for us to say, oh yeah, sure, we vote on yes on body camera, and then that's the end of it, and we don't focus on the other recommendations that have to go through. I mean, it's not this committee's responsibility for those recommendations to go through, right? But as members of the previous committee, I think we all have invested enough time and energy on those that we would like for those to happen before we can even go and spend thousands of dollars on a camera without building that trust and that relationship that we need to build regardless of a camera with Madison Police Department.
Okay, Luke?
In relation to the question around cost and whether or not it should be considered as part of the scope of the committee, that was also a question that I was going to ask. My thoughts on it are that we should, I think I would echo somebody else's thoughts there. We should consider the cost and be aware of it, but ultimately I believe that our recommendation should be based around the facts and the science and the input from the community that we think that will drive the actual impact, and leave the ultimate decision to the city as to whether or not they're willing to pay for the whatever the amount comes out to. I think that it's going to be their decision as to how to assess the value that we believe that it will bring versus the expense that it will cost to implement.
It makes sense. Matthew.
I think cost is actually a major part of this. It's a major part of the feasibility. You're talking about cities that are already cash strapped, like Madison's already cash strapped, not just before COVID, not just now, but before. You're talking about, a always increasing budget within the police department. These aren't cheap things. There's a large maintenance cost. So when you're weighing a cost benefit and the amount of resources that aren't going other places, the amount of how hard it is to get money elsewhere and how easy it is to put money in a police department for equipment, for training, for this, that, and the third, cost is absolutely a part of this. And it's absolutely a major part of it when we're talking about weighing the impact of these things. That's like priorities and equity, 101 when we're talking about where we're prioritizing resources. And this is really kind of gets to the root of that a bit.
Yeah, and I think we're all in agreement that we want to see the cost information so that we can make informed decisions along those lines. Then what I'm hearing from all of you and what I'm suggesting is that we move ahead next week with a presentation from the old committee we make accessible those documents. I wonder if we should start hearing again from some of the community groups.
Absolutely.
And so maybe we could schedule that as well. Are there suggestions as to whom we should invite to present to us from community groups on this issue? We don't have to resolve that now. Also, if you want to think about it and email Tom and me suggestions, then we can work with you, Karen, right, to get them invited and on the agenda.
I think we can start with the obvious, which is Freedom Inc.
Yep, I was just going to suggest what I think you essentially just said, taking some time to think about it, both in terms of the questions that we want to answer and the groups that we want to reach out to. I think that it would be good for us to consider these offline and then try to compile them as a group via email and then discuss at our next meeting. And then from there, we can really build a robust work plan.
Do we have the list of the former committee, the police committee review? Do we have a list of those that we invited to the table? Maybe look at that and go from there and adding more to that list potentially.
So let me interject here real quick, because this is something that the elder work group also asked for. And so I did compile a list from the MPD ad hoc final report. Some of the groups have changed since then. So I would say, just to remind you of walking quorum, negative quorum, et cetera, that you're going to send things to me, and I can talk with the chairs, and Attorney House can make sure I'm doing this right. And I can talk with the chairs, and I can send out information to the rest of you. We don't want to be sending things back and forth amongst the committee members, because negative quorum is like 2 for us here. Like there's not a lot of wiggle room when it comes to open meeting laws, if I'm understanding right, Attorney Haas. So just that caveat, and I'm happy, more than happy, to work with everybody, send things out, get things, call people. I'll give my number to the co-chairs, and just wanted to throw that out there.
So the idea then is that if people have suggestions about individuals or groups that we want to hear from, send those to Karen. Okay? So if you could all do that right away so that we will be able to invite some folks for our next meeting, that would be really helpful. The other thing that I think, because this really goes to the question, the fundamental question about do we want to do this, is we ought to start looking at the research. And I'm wondering, Greg has collected a bunch of it. I have collected a bunch of it. Is there some way that we can have a repository where we can put all this stuff so committee members can pull it and read it at their leisure? Because I don't know that there's any two ways around it, folks. I think people are going to have to look at a lot of this stuff on their own so you can be really informed.
I can also add to that. So what I'm doing with Legistar is I'm providing 2 different simultaneously. One is a document. It basically, if you look on your, let's see if it's on here. Yeah, if you look on your agenda, you'll see above 1, it says 61164 documents. Yeah. This is how we've been doing it. TFOGs did it this way. And so we're doing it this way too. Basically, I'll put everything in. You send it to me, you say, put it in, I put it in. So it'll be there. And once it grows, you can see the list of them as well. And you always have access to those. And on top of that, because it gets big, I'll also attach documents to each relevant agenda item. So for example, Keith and Tom say, okay, we want to talk about this subset of the research. Let's put this on agenda item 3. Then I'll attach that to that file as well, so that you don't have to sift through everything to find anything. I'm trying to do both and here, because I know that this is a thing, and we don't have a lot of options for shared drives. Maybe IT can talk about that a little bit, but as far as I understand it, it's quite difficult, and we want public access. So Legistar is the tool that does allow that.
Okay, great. And I'll just say this also. So Greg and I can both send you the actual PDFs of the articles we found. I'll tell you this, Greg, I recently found a fairly new one that is meant to be a summary of the existing research. And I found it to be pretty useful and helpful because it summarized each of the pieces of research on the topics that's out there and described the strengths and weaknesses from a scientific perspective. So that might be a good place for people to start because these authors have already done the heavy lifting of compiling all this for us. So I'll send that one out. I'll send that to you right away, Karen.
Okay.
But Veronica had her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Veronica?
Yeah, Veronica.
Going back to the list of people we want to reach out to be mindful. The last time we had a little bit of an issue with mental health providers and also with people with disability. And if we can do an intentional search this time for those particular groups, because I know we lack a lot of their insights in the other community.
Yeah, absolutely, Veronica. Thank you.
Good thought. Greg.
Just a quick question to Keith. Who's the first author of that review?
I don't remember. I'll have to find it. Okay. But I can email you privately and share that with you. Okay. I'm pretty sure that won't violate quorum if you and I communicate. But
I don't know. Mike? 2 people. You're muted.
I think if it's just passing along, a document to read without having a discussion about it, that's fine.
Good, thank you. Okay, so it sounds like if we include those matters on our next agenda, that's building a work plan for moving forward, and then we can assess what we need to do after. Some of these we're going to have to keep revisiting, right? We're going to have this, if we have a preliminary discussion about what the research shows, we're not going to exhaust the topic at that next meeting. When we hear from some community groups, we're not going to hear from them all next time. But at least we'll start getting a sense of what are the salient issues that we want to address after we start doing some of these preliminary discussions, and we can build from there. Does that sound okay to folks?
Yep.
Okay, is there more we need to talk about on this agenda item, the work plan, or are we comfortable with starting the way we've outlined here?
Well, I would just add one thing as we move forward. But you know what, Keith, there's one more item we need to discuss, and that's the next meeting. So let's talk about that.
I know that, but before moving to that, I wanted to make sure we were done with the work plan.
Oh.
Sounds like we are. So yeah, let's go ahead. So then
we are done with the work plan, but I'm going to ask that although we're at home, that we are also mindful of time and don't do like previous times where we just go on and on until 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. I'm still working and very hard working for what I do. So sometimes from 7 in the morning until 9, 10 o'clock at night. So let's have a time frame where these meetings are over and they're really over.
Veronica, I was getting ready to make a point, and here it is. So I wanted to leave us, before Keith finishes up with that, just a few things, house cleaning details. I would like for us to make each one of these meetings very meaningful. And we can do that if we're all solution focused. So if we come in, if we do our homework, if we do our research, and we come in and we're prepared to talk about what we found that can help the scenario, that's going to be great. I also think that we need to keep emotions out of it. So as we start making decisions, folks, let's concentrate on what the data says, what the research says or conveys, and let's keep the emotion, because these times is trying, is chaos everywhere. We all know that. So let's keep all of those pieces out of it, and let's think about Madison, Wisconsin, and how it fits into the scheme of things as we deal with Madison, Wisconsin. So those are going to be some house cleaning details that you're going to see me emphasize over and over, so to keep us oriented and on task.
Sounds good. That's great. And Veronica, I absolutely hear you on the time. I'm with you 100%. So we'll aim to keep these meetings to a reasonable duration for sure. Kim.
Is it okay? It's unmuted. It won't let me unmute.
No, you're unmuted. You're good.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Is it okay to ask for a review of what our deadlines are, so to help plan scheduling meetings? How often, how frequent?
I'm looking at pulling up the resolution now.
Okay.
Just
make sure I read it right, understood it right. I thought I read something about an August deadline.
No, what it says is they want us to have it to them by the first Common Council meeting in January 2021.
Okay. I'm going to write that down. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So, can we talk about scheduling our meetings then? Tom had suggested every 2 weeks. Does that sound reasonable to folks? Let's start out that way, if everybody's okay with that, and see if we're making good enough progress, or if we don't, we can adjust as we go. But if we start that way, okay. So
with the first one being on the 15th, Keith.
The first one is on the 15th.
You have options
that's my suggestion for the first one.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fine with me. How's that look for the rest of you?
That's a Wednesday, July 15th is what they're discussing.
That's my 25th wedding anniversary that day.
What other options are there?
Thursday, July 16th.
That works for me. Anybody have any objections to Thursday the 16th? All right, shall we do that? 5:30 p.m. again?
Couple questions. If you wouldn't mind scheduling all of July, I can get you in there. And then when more committees come on to come and look for spots, you will have your spot. Also, do you want 2 hours or 3 hours? Let me know and I'll we can always finish early. I like to have a sense though, because I do have to manage my time.
Well, given what Veronica said and that I'm very sympathetic to, does 2 hours seem like the right length, Veronica? I think if it goes beyond that, people start really.
Blame it on the Puerto Rican. Always.
What's that?
Blame it on the Puerto Rican. Always.
Yeah, right. I'm not blaming you, Veronica. I'm thanking you.
2 hours, 2.5 hours would be fine. Yeah.
What do you guys say? How long do we want to set for these?
Let's start with 2 hours.
Okay. Set it for 2 hours. And can we just, can we just tentatively say every 2 weeks on Thursdays at 5:30 for 2 hours?
Hold on, let me check. Some folks have already claimed some days. So if you look, that actually does, I believe it works for the rest of July. Let me double check my calendar to make sure I'm looking at the right weeks. The next one after the 16th would be the 30th. Is that correct? Yes, it is available.
Okay. All right. Shall we start that way?
Greg has his hand up.
Okay, Greg.
That makes sense to me with one possible exception. Like the Alder work group is going now and I attend those meetings. So if there happened to be a conflict, that's my one concern.
There won't be because it's me. It's me and this account.
We just preempted Thursday nights for them. Huh?
Good.
They already claimed their times.
Okay, good.
So it's perfect. You can attend both.
Perfect.
And I know Karen and Keith that I'll be attending some other meetings as well. I'm on a few committees, so I know that the closer we get to maybe August and September, some of those Thursdays will be taken up. So I'll make sure to communicate with the committee the times that I can't be here for that.
Sounds good. But we can always adjust this later. But for now, that's what we'll aim for.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think we're ready for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
Seconded. All right. And I, unless anybody objects, I see no objection. Motion adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Was that who seconded?
I seconded.